Hey, this week we are celebrating the empty tomb. We're recognizing the one who came out of that tomb. And because we're in the Easter egg series, we're going to call him the perfect egg. Anybody ever called a good egg when you're growing up? You know, you remember that? Yeah, you're a good egg. Okay, it's for us old people. Right? But he wasn't a good egg. He was the perfect egg. And I want us to think about the ways in which Jesus was perfect. The first thing we need to understand, he was perfect in the time that he was born. Galatians 4:4 says, but when, and I got my own translation here, in God's plan, the right or perfect time came, and God sent his son, born of a woman, subject to the law. But not only was he born into perfect time, he lived a sinless life, a blameless life. Hebrews 7:26 says, he is the kind of high priest we need because he's holy, he's blameless, he's unstained by sin. He's been set apart from the sinners and has been given the highest place of honor in heaven. And because he lived this sinless life, that means he was also the perfect sacrifice because there was no blemish. So he was the perfect sacrifice. And then as he rose from the grave, he had a new body, a perfect body. The two on the road to Emmaus did not recognize him because of this new body. Others did recognize him as he allowed them to. But a new body. And today I think he's more perfect than ever. Because today he sits at the right hand of the Father, interceding for us. The perfect egg is what we serve. So today we celebrate, I don't think we can get any more excited than what Derek was trying to get us here. We celebrate the empty tomb, right? All right, we're celebrating the empty tomb. We're celebrating the resurrection of Jesus. He tore a God hole-sized hole in humanity, in human history. But there can be no resurrection without a death. And the death of Jesus certainly seemed to put an end to whatever hope and life that he brought into this world. You know, I don't think there's any way that we can understand what the original disciples felt when Jesus cried out on the cross, "It is finished." They took that literally. They took it literally. From their perspective, it was game over. Whatever their expectations and however Jesus had been trying to redefine those expectations, as far as they were concerned, all of their hope died on that cross. Now, some of his followers, though, they got up on Sunday morning bright and early, even before the dawn, to go to the tomb to grieve. And that's where I want to pick up the story today in Matthew chapter 28. If you have your Bibles, turn there, Matthew 28. We're going to begin in verse 1. After the Sabbath at dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven, and going to the tomb, rolled back the stone, and he sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men. And the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus, who was crucified. He's not here. He's risen just as he said." You know, there's an Austrian psychologist named Alfred Adler who's very famous for one thing, and that is that he began every new counseling session with his new patients with the same question: what's your earliest memory? And no matter what the client would share, the response was always the same. He would say, "And so life is." And so what he meant by that is our earliest memories leave a lasting imprint on our soul. And those memories can create a baseline, a trend line, or today what we want to talk about is a storyline. One of my earliest memories is one Sunday morning we were leaving that little tiny church that I grew up in the humongous town of Bowersville, Ohio, population 220 with 75 dogs. I was leaving church that Sunday morning, and I can remember as if it were yesterday that I grabbed Dan Teeter's hand. He was a preacher at that time. I grabbed his hand, and I said, "Dan, one day I'm going to be a preacher." And you know what? I forgot all about that. I didn't remember doing that. But God, in his sense of humor, he didn't forget. But it's amazing because when I look back at what's taken place over my life, this is what God was preparing me for. This was my storyline. It wasn't just a story, but it became my storyline, and it's a very revealing piece of my personality. It's just the way I'm wired. So the question this Easter for all of us is, what's the storyline of your life? I know that there are little plots and subplots, and we get drawn into them, but what's the meta-narrative? Now, some of you are looking at me like, what in the world, a meta-narrative? Well, here's just one definition. An overarching account or interpretation of events and circumstances that provide a pattern or structure for people's beliefs and gives meaning to their experiences. 2 words, big story. It's the big story. It encompasses all the things that come on in our life, and it weaves them all together. I want you to put a placeholder right there for a moment. We'll come back to that. But I want to look at, there's a picture here I want you to see. Anybody recognize who that is? The guy's name is Elon Musk. Elon Musk is the founder of 3 multi-billion-dollar companies: PayPal, Tesla, and SpaceX. And I've read that when you walk into the headquarters of SpaceX, you'll find 2 giant posters of Mars. One of the posters is of Mars as it currently is. It's just a desolate, cold place. But the other poster looks like this. Think about that for a moment. It looks like it's a suburb on planet Earth, a habitable planet that's been colonized by humans. You see, Elon Musk's stated purpose in life is to colonize Mars. Now, I think it'd be fair to say that most of us sitting here this morning, we don't have dreams quite like that, do we? We're just trying to get the house halfway clean, aren't we? Yes, I am. Just halfway clean. That would be good. We're just trying to pay the bills next month. We're just trying to raise our kids to be semi-civilized humans that one day we'd enjoy eating Easter lunch with. And folks, if we accomplish that, we feel pretty good. Who dreams of colonizing a planet? What inspires that kind of dream? Well, pastor and author named Mark Batterson shares an interesting theory based on Elon Musk's biography. He says in 1950, Elon Musk's parents decided to move from Canada to South Africa, never having been to South Africa before. And Musk's grandfather not only was moving to South Africa, but he disassembled a 1948 Valencia, a Valencia aircraft, an airplane. He put it into crates, he shipped it to South Africa, then he reassembled the plane in South Africa. In 1954 then, Elon Musk's grandparents flew in that single-engine plane 30,000 miles to Australia and back. Now let me put that in perspective. That's only 27 years after Charles Lindbergh's transatlantic flight. And here's something else about that. They flew 10 times further than Lindbergh did. They're believed to be the only private pilots to ever make that flight in a single-engine airplane. So let me connect the dots for you a little bit. It's probably safe to say that Elon Musk's dream of colonizing a planet wasn't conceived in a vacuum. I would imagine that young Elon heard the stories of his grandparents' adventures over and over again. Who dreams of shooting a rocket into space and colonizing another planet? Someone whose grandparents pack up and move halfway around the world and take an airplane and fly 30,000 miles? Think about that. Elon's father once said this. He said this of Elon's grandparents. He said, "We were left with the impression that we were capable of anything." Wow. You see, those stories of his grandparents were more than stories. They became his storyline. They were more than narratives. They became the meta-narrative, which is an overarching account or interpretation of events and circumstances that provides a pattern or structure for people's beliefs and gives meaning to their experiences. Now, what does telling Dan Teeter that I'm going to be a preacher and Elon Musk conquest of Mars, what's that have to do with Easter? What's that have to do with the story that we read in Matthew 28? Well, I think for some of us here today, the resurrection is just that. It's just a story. It's just a story. It's a nice, inspiring narrative to share on Easter Sunday. It's something that you might think about once a year. But let's be honest. We tend to treat it like fake news. It's like a tired and overly dramatized headline that we see on these gossip magazines as we're leaving Kroger's or Walmart or something of that nature. As a matter of fact, it probably would appear as the same as Elvis was just spotted in Vegas. That's kind of how we would view it. But for other of us that are sitting here today, we see the resurrection as a central event, not only in history, but in our lives. You see, we just don't believe in a philosophy or a theology or a morality. We believe in an empty tomb. Amen? We believe in an empty tomb. The Christian faith began and stands with the resurrection of Jesus. And as followers of Jesus, we put all of our faith eggs in one basket, the Easter basket. Right? Now listen, we may not always live like Jesus has risen. And we often get things more wrong than we do right. But here's the deal. When Jesus walked out of the tomb 2,000 years ago, all things became possible. You might even say we were left with the impression that we were capable of anything. Now, I know as we sit here today, I know that some of you are thinking, well, that's just hard to take. I don't know that I can do that. Believing in an empty tomb, that's a huge leap of faith. And I get it, because it's a miracle. And us left-brained people, anybody left-brained out there with me? Us left-brained people, we have a real hard time putting that into the left side of the brain. But that's what a miracle is. That's what it does. You see, God doesn't just exist in the four space-time dimensions he created. And let's just be really honest with each other this morning. I can't prove to you the resurrection took place. But you can't prove to me that it didn't take place. That's what's so crazy. Either way we go, it's a tenet of faith. It takes faith to believe it happened. It takes faith to believe that it didn't happen. But here's where I am. There's some facts that I believe. First fact is this. There's no corpse found in the tomb. There was no body found in the tomb. Never produced. How about the fact that the empty tomb was never disputed by anyone who lived back in that time? They all said, yes, the tomb was empty. There's multiple reports of encounters with Jesus after he resurrected. Even the most radical people who were against Jesus, they reversed their convictions. Even though they opposed him, they now accepted him. And you know one of the greatest facts that I look at is right here. 2,000 years ago, he came out of the tomb, and today we still meet because of that. And it's not just us. There are people all over the world today meeting because Jesus came out of the tomb. You know, all of this today points to an empty tomb for me, and I've bet my life on it. But I'm going to tell you, I bet my life on it. Let me tell you, if you were a betting person living 2,000 years ago, and you could bet on the Roman Empire lasting, or you could bet on Jesus and his little clique and his little way lasting, who would you put your money on? Roman Empire, Bubba. I mean, that's a one-on-one. We're going to win because of Rome, right? But think about this for a moment. 2,000 years later, We name boring salads and low-budget pizza Caesar. And it's not even the big C, it's the little c. But we name our children Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Mary, Martha, Paul, James. And currently there are over 2 billion people who profess to follow the name of Jesus, who walked out of the grave after he was dead for 3 days. Far and away, the best explanation for all of that is there really is an empty tomb. And there really was and is a gospel message that spread because of that empty tomb. And what's so amazing is the same power, the same spirit that brought Jesus out of the tomb is who indwells each and every one of us who accept Jesus Christ as our Lord. It's the same power that we need to tap into. It's amazing. The same spirit that raised Jesus dwells in us. Here's two truths I want us to understand this morning. The resurrection of Jesus reframes our reality. The resurrection of Jesus reframes our reality. And the second is this: the resurrection of Jesus Christ redefines possibility. It's not just a story from the past. It's a storyline for many of us right now, today. But the real question, as you sit here this morning, is it the storyline of your life? More than 100 years ago, a man named Richmond Mayo Smith said this: the underlying cause of our difficulties may be that we're living the wrong story. How we think, how we feel, and how we believe is a function of the stories that we tell ourselves. And then he went on to say this: if you want to change someone's behavior, don't try to change their behavior, change their stories. Therapists, they call this story editing. And the key element in the story editing, I love this, is cognitive reappraisal. Do you know what that is? That's a $150 an hour phrase. That all it means is it's telling yourself a different story. We have a classic example of this found in 1944. 1944, historians call this battle the Battle of the Bulge. Some of you know the name Reeford Young. Reeford was a member of our church for many years, and he passed away not long ago. Reeford fought in the Battle of the Bulge. And I love to hear his stories. They were great stories. But it's interesting because the Allied forces endured bitterly cold winter. Their supplies were low. Their morale was lower. American troops they were completely surrounded in Bastogne, Belgium, by German forces. The German commander demanded immediate surrender. And that's when American General Anthony McAuliffe assembled the 101st Airborne Division. He says this: men, we are surrounded by the enemy. We have the greatest opportunity ever presented to any army because we can attack in any direction. They chose to fight. They won. And many people point to that battle as the turning point in World War II. How'd that happen? How did that happen? It wasn't more ammunition. It wasn't because reinforcements arrived. It was cognitive reappraisal. And by the way, that's $150 from each of you as you leave. See, instead of telling themselves a story that we're surrounded by the enemy, we need to surrender story, they started to tell themselves a story that we can attack in any direction story. And they won against incredible odds. Cognitive reappraisal is a function of focus, and our focus will determine our reality. That's why Paul writes to the disciples in Philippi, and he says this in Philippians chapter 4, verse 8. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. It's so easy for us to get focused on the wrong things, isn't it? Especially when life comes crashing in on us. You know, there's a story from the Gospels about Jesus walking on the water late at night. And he invites Peter to come out. Hey, Peter, come out and have a midnight stroll with me. Peter jumps out of the boat. And when Peter's focused on Jesus, what happens? He walks on the water. When Peter takes his eyes off of Jesus and he starts looking, and he saw the wind, is what Scripture says. I've yet to understand that. Have you ever seen wind? You see the results of wind, right? But it says when Peter saw the wind, he became afraid. And what happened when he became afraid? Boom. He sunk. Folks, a life of faith is pretty much that simple. When our focus is on Jesus, we flourish. When our focus is on anything else, we flounder. Cognitive reappraisal is a function of focus, but it's more than that. It's about the stories that we're telling ourselves. You got to make sure that you're telling yourself the right story. But even more important, you need to tell yourself the true story, the real story. There's a psychological, this idea is not new. It's not a new psychological discovery or the latest method of mental mapping. Folks, it's as old as the story of Joseph in the book of Genesis. Joseph is a favored son of his father Jacob, which was really good for Joseph, but he had 10 brothers. How do you think they liked that? They saw that raw favoritism for Joseph, and they hated Joseph for it. And Joseph didn't help himself much either with his brothers, because he had these grandiose dreams. And what did he do? These dreams where the whole family was going to bow before him. And what's he do? He goes and tells his brothers about him. And they hated him even more. And so one day Joseph is sent by his dad to go check on his brothers who are tending the sheep, a fur piece from home. And their brothers saw him coming. They decided that they would put an end to his dreams once and for all. First thing he thought, we'll kill him. We'll kill him. But then they ended up selling him into slavery. These brothers became the first human traffickers. And it was their little brother. Joseph is taken away to another country where it seems at first he landed in a good spot for a slave, if there is such a thing. He ends up running the household of a powerful Egyptian named Potiphar, who was a head of security for Pharaoh of Egypt. Things are looking good for Joseph. But then problems arose when Joseph started looking good to Mrs. Potiphar. She wanted a slave with benefits. Somebody got that, thank you. Joseph refuses her advances. Mrs. Potiphar loses her cool. And then the next thing we know, Joseph is falsely accused and imprisoned for a crime that he never committed. Years go by, and one day, in a stunning turn of events, Joseph uses that dream interpretation gift to interpret a mysterious dream for none other than Pharaoh himself. And after he does that, right on the spot, Pharaoh makes Joseph second in command in Egypt. Then the day comes. Okay, I'm just putting my feet in Joseph's sandals for a minute. The day comes that Joseph, I know I would have been thinking about this day for the past 17 years. His older brothers show up. They need food for their families because there's this great famine. The brother they sold into slavery, they thought was dead and gone. And he's the one they have to bow to ask for food. What's that old saying? Revenge is a dish that is best served cold. Ever heard that? Well, if anybody deserved a cold-hearted, golden corral, all-you-can-eat buffet of vengeance, it was these bozos. But I want you to listen to what Joseph says to his brothers in Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. This is what it says. You intended to harm me. Duh. We can all see that, can we not? That's the narrative that everybody sees. But here's the marionette narrative that can only be seen through the eyes of faith. Joseph says, but God intended it for good, the saving of many lives. What's Joseph doing? He's reappraising the stories of his past based on the prevailing purposes of God in his presence. Folks, listen, this is not just the power of positive thinking. Okay, I should know. Because I grew up in the town where Norman Vincent Peale, the writer of the book, The Power of Positive Thinking, was born. I know all about it. That's not what this is. This is not power. And it's not what we call it, a Jedi mind. It's not Jedi mind control. It's fixing your eyes on Jesus. This is about telling yourself a different story, a better story. Again, the true story that changes the way we see life. It changes the way we see suffering. It changes the way we see pain. And it changes the way we see death. Hebrew writer says it this way in Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. Since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And let us run with perseverance the race that's marked out before us. How do we do that? By fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. I want you to listen closely. This Easter, it may be the time that you need a cognitive reappraisal of your life. Let me tell you how that happens. The first thing we have to do is go back to the cross. Go back to the cross. Because at the foot of the cross is where God proves his love for you. The foot of the cross is where God proved his love for me. That's where he proves his love. And then you go to the empty tomb. And that's the place where God proves his power. He proves his power. Listen, this resurrection cannot just be a historical footnote in your life. It can't just be a story. It's got to be the storyline of your life. It's got to get into your head. It's got to get into your heart. It's got to get into your blood. It's got to get into your bones. It's got to be the reality that defines who you are and what you're about. Because listen, you're a child of God. You're God's workmanship. You are more than a conqueror. You are not condemned. You're not a mistake. You're not an accident. You're not a label. And you're not a diagnosis. You are who God says you are. We are cracked eggs. We know that, right? We talked about that. We are cracked eggs. But he's a perfect egg. And he can change our storyline. He can change our meta-narrative. Now let me circle back one more time to Matthew chapter 28. If there was ever a moment that called for a cognitive reappraisal, this is it. Two heartbroken followers of Jesus, both named Mary, are going to the grave to grieve. On Easter morning, there's no reports of anyone standing at the tomb going 10, 9, 8, 7, waiting for a miracle. There was nobody counting down, expecting that miracle to happen. It wasn't going to be there. It's on the contrary. We read about some women who left home just before dawn to re-prepare Jesus' body for burial. Why'd they feel that they need to re-prepare it? Can we just say they probably assumed the men didn't do it right? After all, they were rushed to get the body down from the cross on Friday evening before the Sabbath started. And they were men. Just saying. But whatever the reasons were, they didn't show up expecting what they saw. Because nobody expected nobody. Nobody expected nobody. They thought the story that they were in was a tragedy. But what's amazing in the miracle that takes place, God took the tragedy and turned it into triumph. And I love how he does it because he sprinkles a little humor in with it too. I love this. This little statement about the angel says he rolled back the stone and he sat on it. Anybody have older brothers and sisters? You ever wrestle with them? And they sat on you? You know, they put their knees right on your shoulders and you couldn't move. At that point in time, you knew you were defeated, right? You couldn't do anything. You couldn't get your legs up around their neck. You couldn't get them off. You were defeated. And I just find that so interesting because the angel rolls the stone away. Now, understand, this is not to let the resurrected Jesus out. This is to let the downcast disciples look in and to begin to reframe their reality. And then like that stronger brother subduing the annoying little brother, I was the older brother, by the way, the angel sits on the throne, on the stone. And the stone that sealed Jesus' death by the powers and authorities of this world was transformed into a pulpit for proclaiming the power and authority of Jesus. Victory over death. Jesus is not just a loving memory that we show up occasionally to pay our respects to. He's the Lord of life that we obey everything that He commanded because He's with us. A buddy of mine shared me an interesting story. Well, it's been a few years ago, about a passenger in a taxi that was heading for the airport. Passenger leaned up and he tapped the taxi driver on the shoulder to get his attention for something. And the driver screamed. He lost control of the car. He drove over the curb and he stopped just inches from a plate glass window. And then for a few moments, man, they're just sitting there going, Driver said, "You okay?" "Yeah, I'm okay." "Are you okay?" "You scared the daylights out of me," the driver said. And the badly shaken passenger apologized to the driver. "I didn't realize that a mere tap on the shoulder would startle someone so badly." The driver said, "Well, no, I'm the one that's sorry. See, it's totally my fault. Today's the first day that I drive a taxi. For the last 25 years, I drove a hearse." Guess he had a little flashback, didn't he? Folks, here's the great thing. Because of Jesus' triumph over the grave, the time is coming when every hearse that takes people from the land of the living to the land of the dead will be turned into a taxi that takes people from the land of the dead to the land of the living. You see, that's why Jesus came. He didn't come to make bad people good. He came to make dead people alive. Here's my prayer today. My prayer is that the story of Jesus, His life, His death, His burial, and His resurrection wouldn't just be a story. I pray that it becomes your storyline. Jesus' resurrection tore a God-sized hole in human history. The question today is, will you let Him fill the God-shaped hole in your life?